All right, everybody, we are in the home stretch. The next panel is entitled The Future of Technology. A very small subject to tackle. Fortunately, we have as our next speaker someone who is not shy about tackling the subject of the future technology. Most of you in this room know Marc Andreessen as the founder of Netscape, but he's now positioned himself as a true arbiter of the future of technology. He's one half of Andreessen Horowitz, a new venture firm that has just launched, and he is going to talk about his vision of the future of technology. I can think of no better person to interview him on this subject than my colleague, Adam Lashinsky. So please welcome Marc Andreessen and Adam Lashinsky.
Marc, thank you so much for being here this evening. People know in this room, especially if they read the cover story in Fortune magazine about you, a lot of things about you. What they don't know is that you're a practical joker as well. Marc sent me an email 3 hours ago saying that he was stuck on the tarmac at Heathrow and that there was some sort of terrorist event going on, lots of people with assault rifles, and he wasn't sure if he was going to make it. But
I was 10 minutes from the hotel at that point. So
he's here, and thank you.
I knew if cardiac arrest followed, I'd be able to resuscitate.
All right, so all good technology entrepreneurs in Silicon Valley know that VCs are the bad guys. Why do you want to be a venture capitalist?
Well, let me start by saying I never believed that.
Jim Clark did, but you didn't, is what you're saying.
Jim Clark had a conflicted view of venture capitalists. Jim Clark had an enormous amount of respect for a small number of venture capitalists. And then widely varying opinions on all the others. But actually, it was very educational when we raised venture capital for Netscape. You know, Jim was maybe the top entrepreneur in the country at that point. In his career, had come off of Silicon Graphics, which, you know, for people in the industry for a long time, remember, Silicon Graphics was basically the Google of its era. It was where all of the really smart people in the Valley went to work, and just tremendous breakthrough technologies. So Jim kind of had the pick of the litter, and he basically reduced the field really quickly down to two firms, NEA, which he had worked with at Silicon Graphics and had a lot of respect for, and then John Doerr at Kleiner Perkins. And the reason he had so much respect for John was because at the same time that Jim started SGI, John had invested in Sun at that same point in the early 80s. And Jim had always hugely respected what John had done on the board of Sun, helping that company become incredibly successful. So he spoke very highly of those firms. And then.
So my question is, why do you want to be a venture capitalist?
Yeah, well, you know, in large part, it's based on experiences like that of having worked with people like John Doerr. You know, I've just had great experience with VCs. John was just a tremendous contributor at a member of the team at Netscape. And then my second company, LoudCloud, Andy Rachleff from Benchmark was a dream come true in terms of somebody to work with. And so I've had the chance to work with, you know, some of the really good ones, and then I've had a chance to kind of work in the field over time. I guess I would say two things in terms of why to do it. One is because I think that there are going to be a ton of important new companies created in the next 20 years. You know, at least as many new important companies and companies that are at least as important as the companies that we all know about that have been founded in the last 20 years. I think that there's just a huge amount of innovation coming and a lot of very smart new entrepreneurs coming on the scene. And then second is, you know, my partner and I now basically have been ourselves starting and building companies for now 15, 20 years. And so we have a lot of directly sort of relevant domain knowledge of how to actually construct a company around a new idea. And if you look at the history of venture capital, a lot of the original VCs, like Tom Perkins and Gene Kleiner and Don Valentine and Pierre Lamont and some of the original legends of the field had that kind of direct hand-on operating experience. And there are still some of those. You can still find VCs who have a lot of operating experience, but I think we bring that to the table, and I think entrepreneurs like to work with us for that reason.
And is that, would it be fair to say that that's an aspiration of yours? I mean, there's hundreds of people, there's hundreds of VC firms, there have been hundreds of VC firms over the years, and arguably only a few that matter, which is kind of what you said Jim Clark's perspective was. Will Andreessen Horowitz be one of those firms?
Well, that's the goal. It turns out to be, you know, sort of a gigantic sorting process. The sort of way I think the world works is there are a small number of great entrepreneurs who start the great companies. There are not that many great companies started each year. And my friend Andy Rachleff did a study and basically established that over the course of sort of a typical 20-year stretch in this industry, There are maybe 15 companies a year that get created that will ultimately do 100 million in annual revenue. So there are basically 15 companies that basically account for all venture capital returns and basically have the big impact on the world. And so that's just not a very large number of companies. And so there are going to be a very small number of firms and investors who are going to participate in those companies. Those are going to be the firms and investors that those great entrepreneurs want to work with. And so our job as a VC is to be able to get into those deals by being the kind of investor that those entrepreneurs want to work with, and then to be able to actually be incredibly helpful to to sort of keep that cycle going. And I think we have a good shot at that, but we have to prove that.
And so you've just completed this large fund. It's hard to put an adjective. You raised $300 million. This is a laborious, tedious process of going around visiting investors and pitching your plan. For the benefit of the people in the audience who haven't read our story on you, would you give us a very, very short version of the pitch? What is Andreessen Horowitz? How are you different from the competition? What are you going to do? And last question, what are you not going to do?
Yeah, so the pitch actually is almost exactly what I just said. The investors who invest in venture firms, the ones who invested in us are big endowments, foundations, funds of funds, so very sophisticated investors who have been in venture capital for decades in some cases. They're really smart. They're really good at what they do. It was actually really funny because we would go in and meet with these endowment people running these endowments and foundations, and they would say, one of their first questions was, why are you, basically, why would you want to come, spend time with people like us? And of course, my answer was, we spent the last 15 years dealing with hedge fund managers. This is a gigantic improvement. Even if you think that we're complete morons, at least you can't short our stock in this case. And so we got exposed to kind of this whole new world of investor, and they're just extremely smart and sophisticated people. And the pitch that we had to make was basically along those lines. Basically, there's big opportunity. There are going to be a lot of new important companies started, which actually, you can find some very successful and prominent people in the Valley who think that maybe those days are over. And then, we have a chance to work with the great entrepreneurs. We narrowed the focus of what we're doing a lot as compared to, a lot of the existing top firms. We narrowed the domain in which we'll invest to basically only information technology. So we said basically we won't do clean tech, we won't do green, we won't do life sciences, we won't do medical devices, we won't do rocket ships, we won't do space elevators. And so, we basically said we think there's big opportunity in information science and computer science. But we said, on the other hand, we're very connected to and very tied into and very enthusiastic about all the new businesses and the new business models. And we're certainly on the side of believing that a lot of these new models, whether it's companies like Facebook and Twitter, or whether it's a lot of the new cloud companies or a lot of the new consumer electronics companies being started in the Valley, that there are new business models and that these companies are going to be actually big and significant. And so we'll sort of enthusiastically invest in all of the new stuff.
Should we read your comment about clean tech and about space elevators and rocket ships as being explicit criticism of firms like Kleiner Perkins or people like Elon Musk?
No. So the first sort of observation I'd make is we think that, as far as we can tell, certainly starting one of these companies, and then as far as we can tell, investing in these companies, it's very important and very helpful to really understand the product. And so our whole background, we think that these companies and their products are completely intertwined. Like, without a killer product, there's nothing to create a company around. And when you have a killer product, it gives you the opportunity to create a great company around it. And so we think that process is completely intertwined. We want to work with the entrepreneurs who are themselves product visionaries. We like technical entrepreneurs who know how to build the first product. In a lot of cases, the entrepreneurs we like are actually building the first product themselves, hands-on. They really understand the space that they're in. And so we think as investors, we should basically fully understand the categories. And so we don't have degrees in physics or material science or energy or any of these other things. The top venture firms that are moving aggressively in areas like clean and energy have put enormous amounts of time and effort into both educating themselves as well as bringing in new partners who are real experts in these areas. We don't have that. I would make another observation, which is that a lot of the new efforts like clean and energy are tremendously capital intensive. And so these funds are becoming very large. These are becoming very big financial bets. They could pay off gigantically huge, but they are becoming very big bets. I think the field that we're focused on of information technology is inherently a lot more capital efficient. I think we'll be able to deploy a much smaller amount of capital, but in a very highly productive and useful way. And I think that resonated well with the investors when we went on the pitch. So I think that helped us, but it wasn't a criticism of the other approach.
But just to build on that for a moment, capital efficiency is a hallmark of what traditionally was known as venture capital. Venture capital was about making small bets for a potentially big payoff, not making big bets for a potentially big payoff, right?
Well, I don't...
The great venture capital investments follow the model that you're...
Yeah. I think that was true. I don't think that was sort of a definition. At least I think the practitioners early on, I'm just guessing that they probably would have said that the company should not get more money than they need. And so if they don't need very much money, that's great for all kinds of reasons, including the fact it's capital efficient. I think the investors today who are investing in clean and green would say, well, these are really big problems. These are very big opportunities. These are very big industries. These could have very big outcomes. And so if
that is in fact what they say.
Yeah, which is what they say, right?
Yeah.
So if you have to put 100 million or 300 million against something, that may be the ticket to entry in that field as compared to the 10 million or 30 million, of 10 years ago or 20 years ago, for tech companies. What we're finding is in tech, in sort of classic tech, information technology, the capital efficiency is getting, in fact, much greater. So we're seeing the other end of it, which is we're seeing a lot of the companies we like are being seeded on $500,000 or $1 million. And in fact, developing their first product and testing the market and really validating their approach on, in a lot of cases, less than $1 million. And for what we do, that's tremendously exciting because then you can make a much larger number of bets. You can get a lot more experimental and creative about what you pursue. And then as the companies scale, you apply a lot more money.
You and Ben have made a large number of personal investments. 45 is that?
About 45, yeah.
Before you decided to formally form a fund and solicit other people's money to invest. Yeah. Tell us the name of one of those 45 investments that you wish were in the Andreessen Horowitz LLP, I suppose it's called, or something like that.
Twitter.
Portfolio.
I mean, Twitter, obviously, without a shadow of a doubt. There's a whole bunch in there. There's a bunch that we're really enthusiastic about. We love Twitter, we love Dig, we love LinkedIn is another one that we think is going to do fantastic. And then there's a bunch of the last 2 years that nobody's heard of yet.
Yeah, what's one that I bet I haven't heard of most of them other than the four you just named.
Oh boy, there's a ton. It was funded a company called Good Data, which is basically
good what?
Good Data.
Good Data.
Analytics in the cloud. And so basically, essentially, in a nutshell, you can spend $20 million and buy a Teradata data warehouse to process large amounts of data, or you can upload your data into their service, which runs on Amazon Web Services, get a lot of the same analytics capabilities, and pay a very small, sort of by the drink utility pricing. So we're seeing a lot of those kinds of companies. Those are very exciting. Those are super capital efficient. Being able to run an Amazon Web Services really works and is actually really cheap, and a lot of new businesses are getting built around that. Another one, Nicira is a spinoff out of Stanford that's doing some really interesting networking approaches. A bunch of new networking companies coming along. So one of the sort of assertions that we made to our investors is there is actual core innovation happening in a lot of fields that you might think have become mature, but we believe in fact haven't. Networking, storage, security, analytics, databases, operating systems. Like there's a lot of change happening in all these areas because the technology is moving very fast.
Now, will the rules of the game prohibit you from investing the new fund in a company like Good Data?
No. We have an LP advisory board with some of the big LPs, investors, and they get to review those investments. If we decide to bring those forward.
So you can't ask. You can make the case.
Yeah.
Okay.
They generally have encouraged us to do that under the theory that we know more about those companies. And we invested a very small amount of money in those deals with our own money. So it's on a relative basis, we know where our bread is buttered.
I want to change gears a little bit. You've, your career is as a startup person. You've been involved in sort of one famous startup, another very successful sale, which was Opsware to HP. But you've gotten a lot of big company tech cred more recently. I mean, you were a large shareholder of HP for a while, I assume. Maybe I'm wrong about that. I don't know how the
cash. But.
Okay. Okay. But you're on the board of eBay now, and through Opsware, you were exposed to a lot of big companies. I want to read you a quote from the paper today. This is called a newspaper. I know you're not a huge fan of newspapers.
I've heard of those things.
Yeah.
I understand that's an up-and-coming new technology.
The new CFO of Yahoo said that the company has, quote, drained all the right buckets, end quote, and is now, quote, filling back up different buckets, end quote. Now, my interpretation of that is saying that we've identified the things that we're going to disinvest in, and we're going to to disinvest, and we've identified the parts of the business that are good, and we're going to invest.
Right.
I'd like your reaction to that strategy for Yahoo and other companies.
Kind of makes you wonder what was in the buckets. Sorry, I'm just kidding.
It does.
My experience with big companies, actually, I was an intern at IBM in college. And
I didn't know that.
one of the sort of defining experiences of my career, actually, was I spent about 9 months at IBM, and this was in 1990 and 1991. And so I kind of reference big companies off of that experience because, people may recall that was at the height of IBM's both size and problems. That was over 400,000 employees. I went as an intern. I went into you could go on the IBM mainframe. You could log into the mainframe and punch the F keys, and you could call up the org chart, and it had a function that let you calculate how many layers of management were between you and the CEO.
That sounds like an App Store app today.
Yeah, there would be an app for that. The number for me was, in fact, 17. From which I concluded that it would be unlikely that I would make my career at IBM. We had big divisional managers, who would come flying in to review all the projects. Who were like, they would show up, and everybody would be like, "Oh my God, the big guy's coming to town." And you could go on the org chart, and they were still like 8 layers below the CEO. So it's essentially like working for the Soviet Union at the time. Now, they were incredible to me, and I had a great experience there, and there are a lot of very bright people there. But like that's sort of my internal reference for like big companies. So compared to that, all these companies look small. The general answer I'd give you, not about Yahoo, but generally is I guess I'm a little bit of an unusual entrepreneur in that I both enjoy being involved in small companies and big companies. I think that they play different roles. I think that small companies are going to be, just as a category, as a group, are going to be more innovative because there's just nothing quite like the dynamic of a highly focused team of super sharp people in the Jeff Bezos rule, the 2-pizza rule, right? The team where you can have dinner over, and not need more than 2 pizzas. The coherence and the sense of mission and the sense of purpose and the drive and the energy of that kind of thing, combined with equity-based, compensation, ownership of the company, is just a tremendous experience, and a lot of innovation happens through that process. There are counterexamples, Apple, being another, and Google being 2 examples of much larger companies that are still very innovative. But in general, startups are where a lot of the innovation happens. The thing that startups can't do until they become big companies is have a big impact on the world, because the world is just such a big place. These markets are just gigantic. 6 billion plus people on the planet. These markets are just huge. And so you have to get big to have a big impact. And so I've always thought an entrepreneur has to think in terms of getting to large size and scale, and that has to be part of the goal and part of the purpose. Because otherwise, the opportunity to make an impact with what you've invented or what you've built is going to be cut off, and somebody else is going to step in and do it. And you see that in our industry all the time. You see startups that make it a certain way, and then somebody else comes in and actually builds, the big market. Dell and PCs as an example. Dell basically built, a big part of the global market for PCs, years after hundreds of other earlier PC companies, had flamed out. And so, I sort of like both sides of that. And then, from there, it's just a question of how well run is each big company. And of course, there it varies incredibly wildly.
Can a non-technologist successfully run a big technology company? So my general theory on that is that if the company is a product company, which is to say if the company's success or failure is going to be a consequence of the nature and the quality and the innovation of the products that it builds, then you better have somebody running the company who really understands those products. In the technology industry, that's usually a technologist. There are exceptions. Steve Jobs, for example, never had formal engineering training, or at least not much, and has been very successful doing that. He's kind of proved his chops.
Yeah, and he basically learned it by doing it. John Chambers has been another great counterexample. Meg Whitman at eBay was another counterexample. But I would cite them as counterexamples. And I would say, so basically, if you can find yourself a John Chambers or a Steve Jobs or a Meg Whitman, then more power to you. For most of us mortals, it's harder than it looks, I think, as a non-technologist and non-product person to run one of these companies. And the reason is because a lot of the things that a professional business manager cares about and thinks about and operates, ranging from everything from budgets to planning to branding to marketing to sales, finance, legal, like all the things that you think about and you're trained about in business school and as an up-and-coming general manager, at a consumer packaged goods company or a media company or whatever. You can, at a tech company, you see this phenomenon all the time. Somebody with that kind of background comes in and runs a tech company, and the company collapses. And the reason is not because that person wasn't good at all those things that they were good at, it's just the technology changed. And that's just not the top of mind thing that a lot of professional business managers think about. So the alternate model seems to work better, which is the technologist who basically picks up the skills to become a CEO along the way. This is a big area of focus for us as investors. We want to basically invest in the founders, the technical founders who can become CEO. Now, the counter-argument to that is most technical founders are completely unqualified to run their own companies at scale, to which my answer is yes, this is a very difficult, challenging thing to do.
Yeah.
Nobody ever said it would be easy. That's the challenge.
Mark, one of the things we learned, those of us who read your blog when you were writing it, learned was how wide-ranging your intellectual interests are, and that who knew you had opinions on such a wide variety of things. For example, the economy. So here we are, July 2009. What's your forecast for the economy?
I predict that the country will survive in some form. I wouldn't make a macro prediction. In fact, it's a little bit odd. You raise a new venture fund and you have like a 10-year time horizon, and so you find yourself kind of hoping that things will be tough for 3 or 4 years so you can make lots of investments on great terms. So, I wouldn't make like any sort of prediction. But that said, we would be doing the same thing even if we thought everything was about to take off. The big things I worry about are probably the same things other people worry about, which is, generally speaking, we had a big breakdown in sort of how Western capitalism works about a year and a half ago. Have we really fixed and addressed that, or have we kicked the can down the road? I think is a really interesting question.
From the way you ask it, it sounds like you think the latter is the case.
Well, maybe not. Basically there needs to be a tremendous amount of deleveraging, presumably still ahead of us. Still, has that happened yet? Not necessarily. The federal government has injected trillions of dollars into the economy to basically keep the economy going and try to offset that deleveraging. As a consequence, we as taxpayers are owning a larger and larger percentage of the economy basically every day. I'm actually totally in favor of what the government did, taking the car companies bankrupt. I think that was long overdue. But, in general, the government is becoming much more involved in sections of the economy that it hadn't been involved with in the past, and it seems like we have one of those big sort of secular shifts underway. That, I don't think, is good news. For example, financial services. It seems to me that financial services is an area, based on just watching the financial services industry for the last 5 years and seeing what happened, it seems like okay, like now would be a great time for entrepreneurial innovation to come into the financial services industry, and maybe some of these things could be done better. And
we have a startup tonight at Startup Idol at dinner in the financial services industry.
Yeah.
So
there should be a lot of those.
Example.
There should be a lot of those, and the kind of bank or the kind of lending company or the kind of insurance company that you could build with modern technology and modern marketing approaches could do a lot of things really well and could be very interesting. A lot of those fields are very hard to enter as an entrepreneur because they're incredibly highly regulated. They're getting even more regulated. And increasingly, you're actually competing as a startup with the government, which basically is owning or subsidizing AIG, Citibank, on and on and on. So, it's not a healthy situation.
Who'd like to ask a question in the audience? If you don't, I'll keep going. Do I see any hands? Because I don't. Okay, just wait for the mic and identify yourself, please.
I'm Jim Eichner. As you talked about the capital intensity the advantages of investing in IT at this point, you can make a lot of bets at a low, but that also means that the barriers to entry are low.
Yep.
These are small companies that don't have the channel and the capacity necessarily to leverage.
Right.
Does that mean there's sort of one path out for these companies? And are you wary about investing in something that doesn't have barriers to entry?
Right. So we think that these companies do have barriers to entry, and we think basically that it's all up here. So I think the point is exactly right. No matter how smart 5 people are, if it's just 5 people, in a room with 5 laptops, there may hypothetically be another group of 5 people, maybe down the hall in another office suite, who are going to kick their butts. So from that standpoint, the barriers to entry in the early stages aren't significant, which to us puts a huge premium on who exactly is doing it. And what's their knowledge base? How good are they? How aggressive are they? And then this actually feeds back into why I think Silicon Valley is going to be a great place to invest as a geography. It also feeds into where they're located. And I think that what's actually happened is the fact that these companies have become so intensively knowledge-based, and it's become so important as a startup to know exactly what's going on. And it's important to know what the other smart people are doing, and it's important to know, what teams are down the road, going after the exact same idea you are. Wherever the place is that's going to have the most of those smart people sort of in one place is going to be the place where you're going to want to be, because that's where the information is. And we just sort of, by evidence, we just generally, on average, there's an information lag. In the fields we invest in, there's an information lag. A startup that's not in the Valley generally is 3 or 6 or 9 months behind the thinking of the best teams in the Valley. And so it becomes very hard to compete from outside the Valley because you're just flat out behind. And so that's a big part of the sort of the adventure that we're on, is trying to identify those teams of the super smart people who are actually 3 to 6 to 9 months ahead. That said, when these businesses work, they can build structural advantage, I think, quite quickly. A lot of these are network effects businesses. A lot of these companies are building real intellectual property that's actually quite hard to clone as it gets established. And so I do think that there will be lots of different routes to exit. I think that there will be IPOs in the future at some point, as well as a lot of M&A.
Very last question, sort of yes or no, unless you want to elaborate. If conflicts aside, if there were no conflicts, would you invest as a venture capitalist in Ning at an $850 million valuation?
I would get out the spreadsheet and the calculator and look at it very carefully. I am super enthusiastic about Ning, and so I would be.
Ning is a company that Marc
Yes.
co-founded, founded?
Yeah, co-founded with my partner Gina. I would be very excited about looking at that, and for sure talking to my partner about it.
Marc, thank you very much.
Great. Thank you very much.
Adam, Marc, thank you very, very much for capping off a great first day of Brainstorm Tech. It's really been exhilarating for me as one of the co-chairs to see this all come together. I have just a few quick announcements. I know I'm the person standing between you and the cocktail hour, so I'll make this very quick. Please take a moment to register your evaluation of the program on your SpotMe device so that we can have feedback and make it an even better Brainstorm next year. Cocktails are being served in the lobby lounge, and then at about 7 o'clock we'll move into dinner at the Horseshoe Garden. Again, please bring your SpotMe devices because you'll need them to vote in the Startup Idol that Adam is moderating this evening. And go ahead and have a drink, and I'll see you all at dinner.